One of the issues that we picked up from the legislation was the independence of the board chairperson. We said the current legislation says the board is under the Ministry of Commerce. The majority of the stakeholders under the legislation were individual artists, artist managers, and practitioners in the sector. And we're saying, can we have this board as independent as it could? The only thing that we need from government is funding. But can we have it independent? As the sector, we can always draw our action plan to say, this we can do at this time, this we can do at this time, this we can do it. And let us agree that as soon as the legislation is passed, can we then ask for an amendment immediately?
The Mteforo Kolonyalo gives you certain rights where we see no one can adapt your work without your consent, no one can sell your work without your consent, no one can broadcast your work without your consent, no one can publicly perform your work without your consent. No one can communicate to the public your work without your consent. Previously, you did not have those rights legally. The next step, which was critical, is setting up a collection ecosystem. What does that mean? Look, we individual artists, you as an individual, even if you don't register anywhere, from the moment you fix your work, it is copyright protected. Whether athengisa noma a performer noma a broadcaster without your consent. You don't have to join the society if you don't want to, but there's a reason why there are societies in developed countries, because it is more convenient. Societies provide convenience to artists.
So under economic rights, we're basically saying now you have your work, what rights do you have that has an impact on your finances or your value monetarily? The first one is you can prevent a sale or the letting out for hire of this work. So you can now stop somebody your work for economical gain without you getting a piece or without an underlying agreement to the court. I think there's a lot of artists that would walk into a store and hear their music playing and people dancing to it, but there's nothing that you can do or say about that besides enjoy the fact that you're getting exposure. So we're past that. We're saying you can prevent sale or letting out of hire, you can prevent publishing, you can prevent import, you can prevent export, you can prevent performing in public, I've touched on that, you can prevent public exhibition, you can prevent adaptation or altering of your work, you can prevent the broadcasting of it, you can prevent reproduction of it, and you can prevent making available on public computer or network your work. It's quite wide. So there's a lot that your comprehensive rights, your ownership can do to stop somebody else from impinging on what your right is. When we're talking about moral rights, which I think is something that a lot of people might not value quite high, but most of the time it's what actually is an affront to people. It's something that really gets their blood boiling. But it's not for the first time. And you feel it needs to be known that either you are the owner or you don't want people to know you're the owner. So that's that area that's not strictly economic, but says Kulumela on the side of your moral rights. Secondly, right not to be identified as an author. There are those instances where you don't necessarily want to be known as the author of the work. You also have the right to object to derogatory treatment of your work. So you create a piece of work and a comedian does a documentary on your work and you view it as derogatory. You do have recourse in the act to actually pursue that type of. So that's the distinction between your economic rights where we're talking about royalties, what your ownership can do or prevent somebody from doing. But we also have the understanding of which sometimes there's that moral line that I've either been offended in my person or my brand, and it's not entirely economic or calculable easily in money. Is that point clear? We can move on that one. Unrestricted acts versus permitted acts. So here we're speaking about acts that do not infringe and do not require an author or the owner's authorization. You are not impinging on somebody's right according to this act if you are researching. But I'm saying when it's for educational purposes, that's not something where you can stop somebody from doing a copy of 1 or 2 pages of your work. Replacing or conserving library or archival copies of the work, that's not really a breach. Use after protection has expired, and we will get into the period of how long your ownership or your lien over the right of the work you've created lasts, long after you are not here or long after it's been created. Use of parliamentary or judicial proceedings, you will not be impinging on anybody's rights there. Reporting on current events or for reviews and criticism of work, quotations, public reading or an extract, recording of programs for subsequent viewing or listening. Ownership and duration. You've created the work. What makes you an owner, and how long does that ownership or that lien or that right last for? So we're saying ownership will vest in what we have defined as the author. For lack of a better word, I'd like to use creator, the creator of the work. In collective work, so that's when it's a partnership. Maybe there's a producer, there's a songwriter, there's a sessionist, or we collaborated on a sculpture, we collaborated on a book, or whatever the work is. In collective work, ownership vests in the person under whose direction or instance the work was created. So if I've called everyone and I've paid for the venue and we create something, technically speaking, I am the author. The author is the one that is conducting or instructing the collective. And I know for SWAMA we've had a lot of these type of conflicts, especially between manager, producer, artist. Who is the author? Who is directing everything? And I think the act is also helping in this regard. Lastly, where author is employed or commissioned, ownership vested in employer or person who commissions. Infringement and enforcement, meaning your work or your creation is being used without your consent or without your knowledge. That's when we're talking about infringement. Enforcement is when we're talking about what do you do to enforce lelungelo lakho, to actually vindicate the person who's using your work.
Imoto yokuqala 600 ngayithenga ngema-royalties le ngisese-Johannesburg. Ngifuna lokusho lokuthi bekunene mina ngiyajabula uma utaba nemthetho ngoba lo mthetho wa 1912 kudela bosita khona ngoba ngi-R2 ifine yakhona.
In terms of territories, how far are we, like which treaties or conventions are we rectified in, so that we understand how far we go as we are today?
Right.
It's just the regions and territory. Also, he did mention that regionally we're not recognized in different countries. How far are we with those?
Asibonge lokuleseni sicatsadele kona and nale senivile ukuthi akuphi ama-artist ethu. Siyathemba ukuthi sitawugijimisa masinyane sibone ukuthi sida kanjani live. Ngalawo lamafisha ngibongele nalo siphethe office olebeka khona ekuseni manje wase ubida ngaleminye imisebenzi yeli.